My name is Juan, I'm 39 years old, and I was born in Monterrey, Nuevo Leon, in northern Mexico. I have a small auto repair shop in the San Bernardo neighborhood, right at the foot of Cerro de la Silla. I've been married to Carolina for 15 years, and we have a 12-year-old daughter named Valentina. I grew up in a Christian family. My mother has been an intercessor at an evangelical church since before I was born. Everyone in my neighborhood knew me as Doña Esperanza's son, but the truth is, I was living the worst lie of my life. This story happened in September 2021, when churches were just beginning to reopen after the pandemic. At that time, I hadn't set foot in a real church for almost 5 years. I would go maybe at Christmas or on my mom's birthday, just so she wouldn't cry. I would sit in the back row, cross my arms, and wait for it all to be over. On the outside, I seemed like a normal man, a hard worker, a family man. On the inside, I was completely destroyed. Everything changed the day we buried my son. His name was Mateo. He was 5 years old and died of leukemia. It was 8 months of hospitals, chemotherapy, and promises God didn't keep. I prayed every day, fasted, cried out with tears, and God did nothing. My son faded away little before my eyes, and I couldn't do anything to save him. The day we buried him, something died inside me too. After the funeral, I never prayed again. I never opened the Bible again. I never mentioned God's name again except to curse him in my mind. I was filled with rage, bitterness, a resentment that poisoned my soul. Carolina tried to talk to me. She asked me to go with her to seek help, to talk to the pastor. I just told her to leave me alone, that God had abandoned me first. It was then that I started drinking. At first, it was a beer after work to relax, then it was 2, 3, a whole bottle of beer, then I moved on to tequila, mezcal, anything that would help me forget. The workshop started going badly because I would arrive hungover, or sometimes I wouldn't show up at all. Carolina would find me asleep on the couch at 3 a.m., with an empty bottle in my hand, but I didn't see the problem. The problem was God, who had taken my son. The worst part is that I knew I was doing wrong. Deep down, in that place where the truth can't be hidden, I knew I was destroying myself. I knew I was destroying my marriage, my relationship with Valentina, my entire life. But the anger was stronger. The pain was stronger. Every time I thought of Mateo, every time I passed by his empty room, the only way I could cope was with a drink in my hand. Carolina endured like a warrior during those years. She worked double shifts at the factory to make up for what I no longer earned. She took care of Valentina, kept the house going, and still found the strength to pray for me. Sometimes I would hear her in the early morning crying in her room while she whispered my name in prayer. It made me angry, it made me ashamed, but I didn't want to change. My mother, Doña Esperanza, never stopped believing that I would come back. Every time I visited her, she would look at me with those eyes full of love and sadness and tell me that God had a plan, that the pain wasn't forever, that Mateo was in a better place. I would nod for her to be quiet, but inside I hated her for saying those things. How could I defend a God who let a child die? Innocent child? On Sundays, while Carolina took Valentina to church, I stayed home drinking alone. I played, at full volume to avoid thinking, to avoid feeling, to avoid remembering Mateo's laughter running around the yard. My neighbors didn't even greet me anymore. My clients at the shop left one by one. My childhood friends stopped inviting me to get-togethers because they knew I'd end up drunk and fighting. I was becoming completely alone. In September 2021, I was at the lowest point in my life. I owed 3 months' rent for the shop. Carolina and I barely spoke. Valentina was afraid of me when I came home drunk. I thought there was no way out, that my life was ruined forever, that the best thing would be to disappear and stop being a burden to everyone. I didn't know that God was about to do something that would change absolutely everything. God tried to warn me many times before that night. Now that I look back, I can see every sign He placed in my path, but at that time, I was so blind, so deaf, so hardened by pain and anger that I ignored all the warnings. I thought they were coincidences or exaggerations by religious people. I didn't understand that it was the hand of God trying to reach me before it was too late. The first sign came through my friend Bito. We had known each other since we were kids. We grew up together in the same neighborhood. We drifted away from the church around the same time, but Bito went further than I did. He started with alcohol just like I did, then other things came. One day he told me he had gone to see a healer in a town near Linares. He said she had done a spell for him to have good luck in business and to forget his problems. In a few weeks, Bito seemed like a different man. He had money. He bought a new truck. Everything was going well for him. I saw him and felt envious. I confess, I thought maybe that was the solution to my problems. If God wouldn't help me, maybe someone else could. Bito invited me to go with him to see the healer. He told me she could take away my pain, make me forget Matteo, fix my life. I was about to accept. I had already made plans with him to go on a Saturday, but the night before something stopped me. I felt a chill that ran through my whole body and I cancelled without knowing why. 3 months later they found Bito dead in his new truck. It was parked in a vacant lot near the highway to Alidos. The report said it was a heart attack, but he was only 38 years old and had never had heart problems. Those who saw the body said he had an expression of terror on his face, his eyes wide open, as if he had seen something horrifying before he died. Some neighbors said they heard screams that morning, screams of someone calling for help. I went to the funeral. I stood in front of the coffin. From my childhood, something inside me trembled. I felt it was a warning, that I had to change, that I couldn't continue down that path. But do you know what I did? That same night I got drunker than ever to forget what I had seen. In a week I didn't even remember the fear I felt. That's how hard my heart was. The second sign came from my own mother. One afternoon I went to visit her and found her crying in the kitchen. When she saw me, she quickly wiped away her tears and tried to hide it, but I asked her what was wrong. She looked at me with those eyes only a mother has and said in a broken voice, "Son, God showed me in a dream that your time is running out. Please, Juan, return to him before it's too late." I was so angry that I yelled at her. I told her that her God was a liar, that he had taken my son from me, that I didn't want anything to do with him. I stormed out of her house, slamming the door, that it was the last time I saw her before the accident. The third sign passed in the workshop. It was a normal Tuesday. I was working and the engine was as raw as ever. Suddenly, I felt someone watching me. I looked up and saw a man standing in the doorway of the shop. He was an older gentleman, simply dressed, with a peaceful expression on his face that caught my attention. He told me he had a flat tire and needed help. While I was fixing it, he started talking to me. Without me saying a word, he told me, "God knows your pain, son. He didn't take your child, he received him and wants to receive you too." Before it was too late, I froze. I hadn't told him anything about Matteo. I hadn't told him anything about my life. How did he know? I asked him who he was, how he knew about my son. He just smiled, paid for the tire, and walked away. Not by car, walking. He disappeared around the corner. When I went outside to look, there was no one there. The street was empty to this day. I don't know if that man was human or if God sent me an angel, but I ignored him. I convinced myself that he was crazy or that someone in the neighborhood had told him my story. The fourth sign was the clearest of all. One Sunday, when Carolina begged me to go to church with her, I agreed just so she would stop bothering me. I sat in the last pew with his arms crossed, waiting for it to end, but Pastor Nicholas, a man who almost never preached with accompaniment, stopped in the middle of the sermon, looked at the congregation, and said, "There is someone here blaming God for something they don't understand, someone who lost something precious and cannot forgive. The Lord tells me to tell you, your pain has a purpose, but if you don't come back now, there may not be another chance." My heart stopped. Carolina turned to look at me with tears in her eyes. I felt like everyone was watching me, even though probably no one knew that word was meant for me. I cinched my fists, stood up, and left the church in the middle of the service. I got home, grabbed a bottle, and drank it all, trying to numb what I had felt, but I couldn't. Those words echoed in my head for days. The fifth sign was a near miss. A week before the real one, I was driving at night on the highway to Saltillo, drunk as usual. I fell asleep at the wheel for a second. When I opened my eyes, a semi-truck was coming straight toward me, honking. I moved the steering wheel just in time, for the truck passed so close I felt the wind on my face. I pulled over, trembling, my heart pounding in my chest, and you know what I did? After I calmed down, I kept driving, and the next day I laughed about the scare. I have more lives than a cat, I told a friend. I didn't understand that God was giving me opportunities that I was wasting one after another. 5 signs, 5 warnings, 5 times the Lord extended his hand and I rejected it. I was so deep in my bitterness, so drowned in alcohol, so angry at God about Matthew, that I couldn't see what was right in front of my eyes. But God hadn't given up on me. He was about to do something so powerful, so impactful, that I wouldn't be able to ignore it. What happened that September night was something that would change my life forever. It was a Friday in September 2021, the day had been normal, just like any other, than anyone else. I woke up late. I arrived at the shop with my head pounding from the previous day's hangover. I worked on a couple of cars without much enthusiasm. Carolina had texted me asking if I was going to be home early for dinner. I didn't answer her. I never answered her. I didn't know that would be the last night of my old life. When I closed the shop, instead of going home, I decided to go to a bar on Garzasada Avenue. It was a dive, where nobody knew me and I could drink in peace without anyone judging me. I sat at a corner table and ordered a bottle of tequila. I was only going to have a few drinks, but you know how it is, one drink leads to another, and before I knew it, the bottle was almost empty. The bartender told me I'd had enough, that I should call someone to come get me. I swore at him and demanded that he leave him alone. I paid the bill, grabbed my truck keys, and drove out. I staggered toward the parking lot. I could barely walk straight. My eyes were seeing double. Anyone with common sense would have called a taxi, but I didn't have common sense. I was angry, I was in pain, and I had the stupid idea that nothing bad could happen to me. I got in the truck and started driving. I remember the streetlights looking blurry, like moving colored patches. I turned the radio up full blast to stay awake. I was driving on the main highway towards San Bernardino. It was late, almost 1 a.m., and there wasn't much traffic. I thought I'd get home without any problems, that God protected drunks, as the saying goes. How wrong I was. At home, Carolina was awake waiting for me. She told me later that she felt an anguish that night that she couldn't explain. She had tried to call me several times, but my phone was on silent. After the 10th unanswered call, she knelt beside the bed and began to pray. She prayed like I'd never prayed before, with tears, with moans, asking God to protect me, not to let me die without knowing his love again. My daughter Valentina was awake too. She got up to go to the bathroom and saw the light on in her parents' room. She went in and found her mother on her knees crying. Carolina told her to kneel with her, to pray together for me. Valentina was only 12 years old, but that night she prayed for her father with a faith I didn't deserve. 2 women crying out to heaven for a man who had abandoned them emotionally. 2 warriors fighting a spiritual battle I didn't even know existed. While they prayed, I was driving faster and faster down the road. My eyes were closing on their own. I shook my head, trying to stay awake, but the alcohol was stronger. I remember seeing the lights of a bridge in the distance. I remember thinking I was only a few kilometers from home. I remember my hands were loose on the steering wheel, and then I don't remember anything else. What happened next was told to me by the police. My truck went off the road just before the bridge. I went through the guardrail. I rolled down a ravine almost 10 meters deep, and the truck ended up upside down at the bottom. The paramedics who arrived said it was a miracle it didn't explode. They said that when they found me, I had no pulse, my heart had stopped. Technically, I was dead for almost 4 minutes before they were able to revive me, but I didn't know any of that until later. Because during those 4 minutes, while my body lay among the wreckage of the truck, I was somewhere else. My spirit had separated from my body, and what I saw in those minutes changed absolutely everything I believed, everything I thought, everything I was. What I was about to experience was something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. The first thing I felt was peace, a peace I can't explain in words. The pain I'd carried since Matteo's death, the anger against God, the bitterness that poisoned me, it all disappeared in an instant. I felt light, as if a 1,000 kilograms weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I didn't understand what was happening, but for the first time in 5 years, I felt no pain. I opened my eyes and I was floating. Below me, I saw red and blue lights. I saw people moving. I saw something that looked like a wrecked truck at the bottom of a ravine. It took me a few seconds to understand what I was seeing. It was my truck, and the body the paramedics were trying to revive was mine. I saw my own face covered in blood, my eyes closed, my chest motionless. I was dead and watching everything from above. I wanted to scream, I wanted to get down, I wanted to return to my body, but something was pulling me upward. It was a gentle force, but impossible to resist, as if someone were leading me by the hand somewhere. The ravine grew smaller beneath me, the ambulance lights became tiny points, the highway, the city, all of Monterey receded until I saw only darkness around me. Then a light appeared above me. It wasn't like sunlight, nor like any light I've ever seen on Earth. It was a light that was alive, that had a presence, that knew me. The closer I got to it, the more beautiful it became. I felt a warmth enveloping me, a love embracing me. For a moment, I thought everything was going to be all right, that I was going to enter that light and find the peace I so desperately sought. But suddenly I stopped. The light remained above me, but I couldn't go any further. It was as if there was an invisible barrier preventing me from moving forward. And then I heard something that broke my heart. It was laughter, a child's laughter, a laughter I knew better than my own voice. It was Matteo's laughter. My son, my Matteo was up there in that light, and I could hear him. But I couldn't reach him. I shouted his name with all my soul. I shouted and shouted, stretching my arms toward the light, trying to reach him, and then I saw him. For a second that felt like an eternity, I saw his little face. He was smiling. He wasn't sick, he wasn't pale like in the hospital. He was full of life, full of light, more beautiful than he ever was on Earth. He looked at me with those big eyes that I loved so much and moved his little hand as if saying to God, I wanted to go with him, I wanted to stay there forever. But then a voice spoke. It didn't come from any specific place, it came from everywhere at once. It was a voice that made my soul tremble, but that also filled me with an inexplicable love. The voice said only my name, Ruan, just like that. But when I heard my name in that voice, I felt like my whole life was being exposed. Every sin, every lie, every bottle of alcohol, every time I cursed God for taking my son. The light began to show me things. I saw Carolina crying alone in the bathroom after I yelled at her. I saw Valentina afraid of her own father when he came home drunk. I saw my mother kneeling in the early morning, fasting for me every Monday for years. I saw the pain I had caused the people who loved me most and felt such deep shame that I wanted to disappear. Then the light above began to fade, Matteo's laughter faded and I began to descend, not to the ravine, but to another place, a place far below, very far below, where there was no light, no love, no peace, a place where I could sense something awaiting me, something dark, something terrible. And as I descended, the voice spoke again. First you will see where you were going, then, we will decide where you will go. I descended into the darkness like a stone falling to the bottom of an endless well. The light where Matteo had been disappeared completely above me. The love I had felt, the peace, the warmth, all faded little by little and in its place came something I have no words to describe, a cold that wasn't of the body, but of the soul, an emptiness that hurt more than any physical pain I had ever experienced. The darkness was total. It wasn't like the night where one can see shadows or silhouettes. It was an absolute, complete, dense darkness. I felt I could touch it with my hands. It was a darkness that had weight, that had presence, that was alive, and in the midst of that darkness I was completely alone, more alone than I had ever been in my entire life. Then I began to listen. At first they were distant sounds, like murmurs coming from all directions, but the deeper I descended, the clearer the sounds became. They were voices, thousands, millions of voices, but they weren't speaking to each other. Each voice was alone, isolated, locked in its own bubble of darkness. Some were crying, others moaning, others were simply repeating the same words over and over, as if they had lost their minds. I understood then what hell was. It wasn't fire or battling demons, as I had imagined as a child. It was this. It was the total absence of God. It was eternal loneliness. It was being separated from all love, all hope, all light forever. And the worst part was knowing there was no way out, that this darkness was permanent, that the voices I heard had been there for an eternity and would be there for another eternity. Suddenly, my feet touched something solid. I had arrived at some kind of ground, though I couldn't see anything. I stood there trembling, my heart pounding with a terror I'd never known, and then I saw a figure a few feet away. It was barely a silhouette in the darkness, but something about it seemed familiar. I walked toward the figure without meaning to, as if my legs were moving on their own. When I was close enough, I recognized him. It was Bito, my childhood friend, the one who had died 3 months earlier in his new truck. He was standing motionless, with empty eyes staring into nothingness. His face was expressionless, just a terrible emptiness. I walked over, and called his name. He turned slowly toward me, and when our eyes met, I felt my blood run cold. Bito opened his mouth and spoke. His voice came out hoarse as if he hadn't spoken in years. He said, "Ruan, you too." It wasn't a question, it was a statement, as if he already knew I would end up there. Then he said something that shattered my soul. I thought I had time. I thought I could make things right with God later. I thought what I did with the healer had no consequences. He paused. I was wrong, and now it's too late forever. I asked him if there was any way out, if we could do something, pray, ask for forgiveness. He just shook his head slowly. His eyes remained empty, without tears, without hope. He said, "There's no way out here, Juan, no way to pray here. God doesn't listen here because we chose to turn away from him, forever." And then something began to drag him back, into an even deeper darkness. He didn't fight. He just looked at me one last time and whispered, "Don't end up like me." I felt cold hands grabbing my ankles. I looked down, but I couldn't see anything. I just felt those hands pulling me to the ground. There were so many, dozens of hands that grabbed me, that pulled me down. I tried to run, but my feet were pinned down. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. Terror completely paralyzed me. I began to sink into the ground as if it were quicksand. The darkness was swallowing me. In that moment of absolute panic, a thought crossed my mind. It wasn't an elaborate prayer or pretty words. It was simply the remembering of what my mother taught me when I was a child. The name she told me had power. Above all, with the last of my strength, with the darkness already covering me up to my chest, I shouted that name, Jesus, and the instant that name left my mouth, everything changed. The light exploded in the middle of the darkness like lightning splitting the sky in two. It was so intense, so powerful, that the hands that were holding my ankles immediately let go. I felt the darkness retreat around me as if it were afraid, as if that light burned it, and in the middle of that light I saw someone walking toward me. I couldn't see his face. The light coming from him was too strong to look at him directly, but I could see his silhouette. I could feel his presence. It was a presence that filled all space, that weighed more than the darkness, that made even the air around me tremble. I fell to my knees, unable to stop myself. It wasn't the decision, was instinct. My body knew I was standing before someone before whom one can only kneel. Then I saw his hands. He extended them toward me, and I could see them clearly despite the light. They were strong hands, a worker's hands, but in the center of each palm was a mark, an open wound that didn't bleed, that glowed with a reddish light from within. The nails, the marks of the nails. I was kneeling before Jesus, the same Jesus I had cursed for 5 years, the same Jesus I used to mock when my mother spoke of him. I wanted to speak. I wanted to ask for forgiveness. I wanted to explain why I was so angry, why I had rejected him, why I had blamed God for Matthew's death, but the words wouldn't come. It was as if my mouth were sealed, as if before that holy presence all my excuses, all my justifications, All my reasons were so ridiculous that they didn't deserve to be spoken. I could only stand the trembling, weeping without tears. The voice of the enemy tried to whisper one last time in my ear. He said, "He won't forgive you, you rejected him, you cursed him, you chose alcohol instead of him, it's too late." But that voice sounded weak now, distant, like a radio with dying batteries. In the presence of Jesus, the enemy had no power. He could only lie from the shadows, hoping I would believe him once again. Then Jesus spoke. His voice wasn't thunder or a shout, it was soft, calm, full of something I was slow to recognize, because I hadn't felt it in years. It was love, a love so pure, so complete, so undeserved, that it hurt me more than any reproach. He said my full name, Juan Alejandro Mendoza, my middle name that no one used, that I had forgotten I had. He knew it, he knew everything about me, and then he asked the question, with that voice that was soft as the wind, but heavy as a mountain. He asked, "Ruan, why do you blame me for taking in your son when all I did was save him from the pain of this world?" The words pierced my heart like a knife. I had never thought about it that way. I had never considered that perhaps God hadn't taken Matthew to punish me, but to protect him, to give him a better life than I could offer him. I couldn't answer. The tears that hadn't come out in the darkness now streamed down my face uncontrollably. 5 years of anger, bitterness, and guilt poured out of me with every sob. I had blamed God for something I didn't understand. I had wasted 5 years hating the only one who could heal my pain. I had almost destroyed my family seeking comfort in a bottle, while true comfort awaited me with open arms. Jesus asked another question. This one was worse than the first. "Your wife has prayed for you every night for 5 years, your mother has fasted every Monday since you left, your daughter has cried begging for her father to be the way he used to be. What have you done with that love?" Each word was a hammer pounding on the walls I had built around my heart. I saw all the pain I had caused. I saw the nights Carolina cried alone. I saw my mother's prayers. I saw Valentina praying for me with her mother while I was at the bar. I crawled forward, toward those hands with the nail marks. I no longer cared about my pride. I no longer cared about my excuses. I no longer cared about anything but one thing. With a broken voice, barely a whisper, I said the only thing I could say, "Forgive me, please, forgive me." And I waited, my heart stopped, to hear her answer. The silence that followed my words lasted what seemed like an eternity. I remained kneeling, face to the ground, not daring to lift my gaze. I had said, "Forgive me," but I knew I didn't deserve it. 5 years cursing God, 5 years destroying my family, 5 years drowning myself in alcohol while my wife prayed and my mother fasted. How could anyone forgive all that? Then I felt something I didn't expect. A hand touched my head, a warm, soft hand, with a wound in the center that I could feel against my hair. The touch was gentle, like that of a father comforting his child after a nightmare, and with that touch came a wave of such strong, overwhelming love that I thought I was going to fall apart. It was as if all the love that exists in the universe had been concentrated in that single moment. Jesus spoke again, saying, "Ruan, I died for this moment, for you kneeling here asking for forgiveness. You don't have to earn my love, you just have to receive it." The words entered my chest and began to melt something that had been frozen for 5 years. It was as if ice was turning into warm water inside me. The pain was still there, but I was no longer alone. Now there was something greater than the pain. It gave me the strength to lift my head. For the first time, I could see him more clearly, not his whole face, because the light was still too intense. But I could see his eyes, eyes that held all the suffering in the world and all the love and heaven at the same time, eyes that knew me better than I knew myself, and in those eyes there was no condemnation, only mercy. Then he showed me something that broke my heart in a different way. The light changed, and I could see an image like a window to another place. It was Mateo, my son, but he wasn't suffering, nor was he alone. He was playing in a green field that shone with a golden light. He was laughing, running around, completely healthy. Other children were playing with him, and there was a peace in that place that I had never seen on earth. Mateo stopped as if he knew I was watching him. He turned toward me and smiled with that smile I missed so much. He waved his little hand and said something I heard clearly in my heart, even though his lips barely moved. "I'm okay, Dad, don't cry for me anymore, I'll see you soon." It wasn't a sad goodbye. It was a promise that one day we would be together again. Tears streamed uncontrollably down my face, but they were no longer tears of pain. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of a joy I didn't know could exist alongside sadness. My son was okay. All this time I thought God had taken him from me. God was watching over him in a place where there was no leukemia, no pain, no death. He was protecting him from a world that would only bring him suffering. The image of Matthew slowly faded, but the peace he left me remained. Jesus placed his hand on my chest, right where my heart was. I felt a warmth spread throughout my body. It was as if something inside me was being burned away, the bitterness, the resentment, the hatred toward God, all of that was burning away, disappearing, being replaced by something new, something clean. Then Jesus spoke the words that changed everything. "I forgive you, Ruan, now come back. Your time here is not over. Your wife needs you, your daughter needs you, and there are others who need to hear what you have seen today. Come back and never doubt my love again." His voice was firm, but full of tenderness. It wasn't a cold command, it was a commission, a purpose, a reason to live that I had lost 5 years ago. The light began to grow more intense. I felt my body lift away from that sacred place. The last thing I saw were Jesus' eyes looking at me, and the last thing I heard was his voice saying, "Remember, Ruan, I was with you in the darkness, even though you couldn't see me, I was always there, and I always will be." Then everything turned white, a pure, total white that enveloped me completely, and then, pain, so much pain, the pain of a shattered body coming back to life. The first thing I felt was an unbearable pain in my chest. It was like someone was hitting me with a hammer over and over again. Then I realized it was the chest compressions the paramedics were doing to revive me. Then came the air rushing into my lungs, burning me from the inside. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My body was mangled, and every breath was torture. I opened my eyes and saw lights, red and blue lights spinning, flashlights shining in my face, strangers staring at me in amazement. I heard someone shout, "We have a pulse, he's alive." Another was saying it was a miracle that I'd been without vital signs for more than 4 minutes. I wanted to tell them it was a miracle, that I had no idea what had just happened, but my mouth wouldn't respond. I could only close my eyes as they put me on a stretcher. The ambulance ride was a blur. I drifted in and out of consciousness, but every time I opened my eyes I remembered everything. The darkness, the cold hands, Peter with his empty eyes, the light, Jesus, Matteo smiling in that golden field. It hadn't been a dream, it hadn't been a hallucination. I had been dead and I had seen heaven and hell and had returned with a message. We arrived at the University Hospital of Monterey. They took me straight to the emergency room. I had 3 broken ribs, a fractured leg, a head injury, and multiple wounds all over my body. The doctors didn't understand how I had survived the accident, much less did they understand how I had revived after 4 minutes without a pulse, without brain damage. One of them told the nurse that in 20 years of practice he had never seen anything like it. Carolina arrived at the hospital at 4 a.m. Someone from the police had gone to the house to notify her of the accident. She told me later that when they knocked on the door, she knew something had happened. She and Valentina had been praying for me all night, kneeling beside the bed. When the officer told her I'd been in a serious accident, she just said, "But he's alive, right?" The officer nodded in surprise. When Carolina came into the room where they had me, I could barely keep my eyes open. I had tubes all over me, my face swollen, my body bandaged. She came slowly, tears streaming down her cheeks, and took my hand with a tenderness I didn't deserve. She looked into my eyes, searching for the man she loved, wondering if I was still the same bitter drunk I'd always been. I squeezed her hand with what little strength I had, and the first words that came out of my hoarse, barely audible "Mo,"